Your Excellencies, ladies and gentlemen, dear guests, good afternoon. My name is Tkeshelashvili. I'm member of the Board of Trustees of Nizami Ganjavi International Center. I'm a former Foreign Minister, Deputy Prime Minister of Georgia, and I would hope a great friend of many of you in the room that we have had a pleasure and luxury of meeting over the course of more than a decade now. It is my honor to welcome you all at the 12th Global Baku Forum. This forum, over the course of more than a decade, indeed has earned trust, engagement of most esteemed and distinguished speakers across all continents. And I think it's a testament to the fact and to the role of what this center represents. It's a space where most pressing, challenging issues of today and tomorrow on a global scale are discussed openly with candor, with the spirit of inquiry, open-mindedness, and the commitment to the future, better future for all of us, for humanity. Lately, for the past few years, at every time when we would meet at Baku, we always had that feeling that the world was at a turning point at the time. We've been in a crisis, things were shaping up in a different way that we couldn't predict, and we had that feeling of urgency to understand how this change would unfold. But I have to say that today, it truly feels that we are at a moment of history when, without an exaggeration, we could say that we are in the wake of tectonic changes and transformation of the global world order at a time when there's not that much known what will happen, and the pace and depth of change could not have anticipated and by many even a decade ago, and that's not a long time when we speak about international relations. The pace and depth and magnitude of a change is immense, and I guess because of that, the role for leadership, wisdom, and experience that this room holds is even more required, is even more needed, and an ability to act alongside our ability openly and with the wisdom that we'll have to discuss the issues that we will be tackling throughout the course of the Baku Forum. I have to recall today Rebecca's reference to her saying that it is already a fact that we are living in a multipolar world, but is it going to be a multilateral multipolar world, or it will be a multipolar world that will be fragmented, that will signify, for the most in the international community, limited sovereignty, tension that is accompanying great power competition, or perhaps we will manage to turn multipolarity in a world that is more of a hallmark that leads to partnership, that overrides the rivalry and tension that is palpable right now when we observe international relations. Well, to help us to navigate all these important questions and then the shifting global dynamics, we'll have today at this very opening first panel a remarkable panel of speakers that bring wisdom and experience that is unmatched for many forums that I can say that could have discussed the same issues, that represent diversity of the countries and the regions and even continents. But before we start the panel discussion, we have a pleasure to have a very special conversation with President Charles Michel. Thank you. Mic, I think. President Michel, you've been at the center of global, European for sure, but then global decision-making processes and have a first-hand experience of what it takes to tackle crisis, what it takes to bring many actors to the table so that the solutions are found to the issues that affect most in the union that be or even beyond. Your tenure coincided with one of the most challenging periods that up until now we thought they were. COVID-19, Russian invasion of Ukraine, and then internal frictions, difficulties, decision-making processes of the EU. I could say the same in my part of the world as well, how much enlargement-related debate has been not the easiest, to say the least, when it comes to how EU positioned itself in the space. But having said that, and if you look at all of that from the perspective of today, do you feel, if we're honest about it, that it was almost some sort of a prelude, perhaps, of the real change that is unfolding now? And what's your take on that? How you would assess what we are experiencing now? Are we a little bit exaggerating the moment, or maybe it is really that profound as we feel it now? And if that's the case, what's triggered it, and then how we are going through this process?
Now, thank you. And I think that indeed we have to try to be lucid about the challenges we face, all of us. In the last 5 years, you're absolutely right that with COVID-19, with the war launched by Russia against Ukraine, with some crises, tensions, and also the state of the world, we have seen at the European Union's level that it was again a moment to make decisions. And in the last 5 years, in fact, I think that we took the world by surprise on some topics. When we started to face the COVID crisis, we managed to order vaccines all together. It was not taken for granted. I can tell you that at the beginning of the crisis, some member states, they had the impression that it would be easier to tackle the crisis by being alone, and very quickly we understood that it was not realistic. When Russia decided to invade Ukraine, you remember that it took a few hours for us on the EU side to make clear choices, and we decided to support Ukraine with financial support, but also with military equipment. It was the first time in the history of the European Union that we made such a decision. In a few hours, we made this clear choice, and we decided to develop an approach based on sanctions against Russia. Why? Because we think that the fact that a permanent member of the Security Council in possession of the nuclear weapon makes a decision to invade a country with 40 million inhabitants, this is not a detail. This is something which is serious. And it shows that the rules-based order is put under pressure, including by those who are supposed to be the guardian of this multilateral order. First question, do we need a rules-based order? Answer is yes. Second question, is this rules-based order fair and representative of today's world and realities? No, this is not the case, and that's why we fully support the idea that we have to bring more inclusivity, more fairness in the global governance, and I think that the European Union could be the regional organization at the front line to defend those ideas. And finally, maybe a provocative sentence. I think that for the EU, Donald Trump is a chance. Why? Because with what we face today in the White House, with what we face today in the United States, it's not possible anymore to be in denial. We understand on the EU side that we have to make decisions to be more master of our own destiny. It would be good for the future of the European Union, but in our opinion, it would be good for the world, because it would help to strengthen a multilateral system in support of the multipolar world.
You made a perfect segue to my next question. Well, to be a little critical and challenge perhaps on how over the course of the past years reaction to the crisis have been happening, and I do acknowledge that it's been instrumental how the EU acted. But if you look back, too many times we have said that a given crisis is a wake-up call, either for the EU or for the international community. But then after some time, we would say that we hit the snooze button, so alarm didn't work. So every time you see that something more and more in terms of the scale or depth is happening when you don't pay attention at a time when decisive action is needed, which requires more action, more resources, more mobilization. And then just to trace it back a little bit, 2008, invasion of Georgia by Russia, I might be biased, but very timid, to say the least, response. 2014, very little consequences. 2020 was different as a wake-up call in that level in terms of the reaction to it. But then when we look at it now, it was still reacting to it rather than being proactive in strengthening autonomy of the EU so that the wake-up call could have been sufficient. So it's paradoxical, but then a transatlantic ally right now to serve that purpose, as it seems, for the EU to finally awaken to the need that strategic autonomy is a necessity rather than aspiration, one would hope. What is your take on that? Are we there, or it might still be a passing moment, and then for the EU it will be still difficult to put act together in terms of strengthening autonomy when it comes to the Union?
Look, you know, I spent 10 years in the European Council, and this makes me one of the veterans of this very strange political body, because it's a unique situation where you have 27 heads of state, heads of government, who meet on a very regular basis to make decisions all together. And I've seen the evolution within this political body. And let's be honest, a few years ago, myself and others, we were already strongly in favor of more strategic autonomy for the European Union. We were strongly in favor of more common investment in the field of defense and security, for more capabilities in the field of defense and security. And let's be honest, if we are French, we can observe that, in fact, the European Union's model was based on three principles: cheap energy coming from Russia, very comfortable, not only for Germany, it had a political and economic impact for all the European Union. Cheap security, because of the massive investment by the United States and the prominent role of the United States in NATO, and cheap products because of the supply chains and the role played by China. And today we understand that we have to change this fundamental paradigm. And I think that there's a big difference between today and a few years ago. I feel that the mainstream is not the same anymore. In fact, 5 years ago, the mainstream was very clear. There was a form of reluctance with this concept of strategic autonomy, because we had the idea that this transatlantic alliance is granted forever. Article 5 is very robust, very solid. Today, I can tell you, the mindset is different. And there is something which is very important in my opinion. I think that the most important thing is that at the European Union's level, we have to be more self-confident. We have strengths, we have tools, and sometimes I have the impression that we are a bit too hesitant, a bit too reluctant. Be more self-confident, advice number one. Second advice, I think that we have to work hard to be united. This is not taken for granted, and we need to listen to each other, we need to respect each other, we need to trust each other. But when we are united, we are powerful, we are impactful. When we are united, we can decide to support Ukraine. When we are united, we then decide to make steps in the field of the enlargement policy, which is a strategic choice, which is extremely existential and vital for the future, in my opinion. And my last point, the economic development, innovation, competitiveness, and security and defense, it goes together, in fact. And these are the two priorities for the years to come. We have to strengthen our economic base. There is a very good report issued by Mario Draghi with very good recommendations. We have to make choices, we have to make decisions. By the way, important to observe that in Germany, they are also taking into account the need to invest much more. And they have started to discuss this idea that this constitutional clause related to the debt break could be reformed. Let's see what we need to debate in Germany. It would have a major impact not only for Germany, but also for the European Union.
Indeed, the change in Germany, it's historical in that regard and gives a great hope. Certainly markets felt that way when it comes to comparisons between the European and the American ones right now. To dig deeper perhaps into the economic issues, as it seems, at least for now, we are at the beginning of the trade war season. And how long it's going to last, what will be impacted, it's hard to assess right now. But the impact is already felt, with uncertainty, lack of trust, and then pause buttons being pushed, at least by investors, when it comes to decision-making processes. Europe was swift, was ready for the tariffs, and then the sort of retaliatory measures are already at place. What is your take with all the experience that you have in the internal processes in the EU? How EU will be able to balance that task to secure its economic interest, at the same time maintain that openness in the global trading systems as much as it can so that, everything doesn't fall the victim of the trade wars. Is it a plausible task, or it's going to be very challenging, close to insurmountable?
Yeah, this is another very interesting example, because you have seen it immediately. The European Union, we acted in a very united way. We understand what is going on, we understand what will be the consequences of this trade war launched by the White House. This is, in our opinion, in no one's interest. This is bad for everyone across the world. And my reaction would be, let's try to work hard with the WTO. I think the WTO has a major role to play, and we should try to rally all the regions across the world, all the powerful economies, to be more ambitious in terms of internal reforms regarding the WTO to make possible a predictable and fair trade with small level playing field, point one. And point two, and in fact, on my side, this is not new. I think that the responsibility of the EU is also to engage a lot with the rest of the world, not only with our traditional allies and partners. And that's why, when I was in charge, I tried to do my best to connect the European Union much more on other parts of the world. And here, I would like to share my experience. I have the impression that in the future, and maybe it will take time, we don't know, but in the future, the regional organizations, they will have a more prominent role to play. Because you have, of course, the national level, very important in the multilateral system. You have the global institutions, UN agencies, UN system, financial architecture. But I think that the regional organizations, and of course, on the EU side, we have our own experience, our own level of integration. But we can see in Africa, with the African Union, and with the African regional organizations. You can see in Latin America, you can see in ASEAN, Southeast Asia, in the Gulf countries, in that region, in Central Asia, in the Caucasus, you can see the interest for more cooperation. And I think this could be interesting on two topics. On the one hand, in terms of security, in terms of trying to prevent some conflicts, some tensions, in trying to resolve those conflicts, point one, but it could also be helpful in trying to integrate from an economic point of view. I think that we should not underestimate the powerful role that could be played in the future by the regional organizations.
Very interesting point, and then that leads me to the question related to actually regional partnerships for the EU itself, as a continuation to what you already mentioned. The world is indeed changing. It is becoming competitive to the degree that with traditional allies as well could be competitive when it comes to transatlantic as it comes to now. Enlargement is not covering all countries as an appeal or attraction, right, when it comes to the rapprochement with the European Union. So strategic partnerships are key in terms of expansion of the role and positioning of the EU, especially if strategic autonomy comes into play. So do you think that EU has that in it right now to become more decisive in terms of time and action in this speedy competition world to match that strategic need with an action? And an example of that is perhaps the very region we are in, Caucasus, Central Asia, Black Sea area. We see that at the local level, as you've mentioned, there is a remarkable growth of strategic partnerships right now between Azerbaijan and Central Asian countries. It becomes a unity of its own when it comes to the vision, how to position the region. Well, Georgia and then Black Sea and then Turkey has always been part of that paradigm. EU has been always an actor, but it felt as if it didn't think that it had to compete that much with other actors that we are coming in with more footprint in the region. Do you think there is a reconsideration of that might take place more? And I'm not only concentrating on this region, but it's giving an example of what I mean for this question.
This is a very good point, and this region is a very good example, in my opinion, because if you look at this region in our history, this region has always played a very important role in terms of connectivity. And I think it's something we should take into account and we should invest more in that field in the future, point one. Point two, this is true. When I became President of the European Council 5 years ago, very quickly, I had the impression that we had to engage much more, including in that region, and to find the right balance between our fundamental principles, values, and you know that this is something very important within the European Union, and the interest, our interest. And that's why, indeed, we have tried to deepen our ties with that region. There are a lot of examples in the field of energy, in the field of investments, but also at the political level. And I certainly believe that if we try to connect much more from an economic point of view in the future, it will be also helpful to connect from a political point of view. Because if we start to develop some common projects at the economic level with new partners, then it will become more spontaneous to exchange views, to try to understand better how they think on the other side, how they see the world. And I think it's also important at the European Union's level to try to be a bit more curious and not to see the world or to watch at the rest of the world with sometimes our own cliché, but to engage, to listen, and to try to have a more targeted understanding, a more fine-tuned understanding of the rest of the world.
Perfect responder. I can cover the base with many questions. You're sharp, you're targeted, and that gives me opportunity to ask you one more question within the time frame that has been allocated to us. And I have to end with a question that is on our minds, at least in this part of the world, and I would hope and elsewhere as well across the globe. It's the end of the war in Ukraine, Russia's aggression against Ukraine. Now, we had a very particular place right now when talks about ceasefire and potential solution of the war is being discussed in different ways. But one can say with certainty that the way this war will end will be consequential to the future of humanity in many ways, an impact on how the world order will be shaped after that. If it's a deal that just freezes the conflict, it's one scenario. The deal that gives an actual lasting peace, a possibility with economic prosperity and recovery and security for Ukraine, it's a different case scenario. And then when it comes to protracted conflict of attrition, it's a different case scenario. So it's hard to say which scenario might prevail. But if you could elaborate on what do you think, what are the markers in these scenarios that will define the future of the world? So if one or the other materializes ultimately, what are the either challenges or opportunities related to that? Why it's so impactful for the world? Why, when we say, at least in this room, in this part of the world, Slava Ukraini, it just resonates in our hearts because we do understand that Ukrainians are not fighting only for their own security, for their own future. They are fighting for what the future for all of us will be with their blood and with their lives that are sacrificed right now. So what's your take on that?
Yeah. First, I think we could face in the weeks to come, in the months to come, something that we know well. In politics, this is a situation when there is an opposition, even a contradiction, between the short-term interest and the longer-term interest. And maybe we could face such a situation that could be a dilemma in the weeks to come or in the months to come. Is my first point. But I think that already today, this war against Ukraine, it has a huge impact on the world, including on the EU, because I sincerely think it will help us to make decisive choices in terms of defense, security, investments that are needed in terms of support for our European Union's industrial base. And when I say European Union's industrial base, in fact, I'm in favor of an enlarged approach. I feel that the European continent has to demonstrate that we can provide security guarantees. And I think that Turkey, the United Kingdom, Norway, the Western Balkans, and other countries which have an interest for the security in Europe, they can work together. They can cooperate a lot together in the months to come. This could be a very powerful leverage. And my third comment on this very difficult question is indeed, we have to take care if we want to consolidate our belief that the international law and the rules-based order is the best guarantee for peace, security, prosperity. And we have to take into account that the way we will make progress, the way we will bring solutions, it has to take into account the fundamental principles. If not, sooner or later, it will give the impression to the one or to the other that it is possible just to violate the common principles, and sooner or later you get the benefits from your crime.
Thank you very much for your candid responses, for your time spent with us. I'll ask all the panelists to come over to the scene and join